Hi. So welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us for this community conversation, Readiness and Resilience. My name is Luther Hughes. I am a program manager at Artist Trust, and I'm also a poet and editor from Seattle, Washington, where I currently live in the South End, and specifically, like I always say, Skyway, exactly. My pronouns are he, him.
And hey everyone, I'm Lydia Boss. I'm also a program manager at Artist Trust, and I'm a visual artist living in Seattle. And if you feel inspired, go ahead and throw in the chat your name and where you're joining us from. We'd love to see that and welcome you into the conversation today. This conversation, it's part of a 5-part series on readiness and resilience at Artist Trust. And we're presenting this work in partnership with Surf Plus, which is an organization, they're national, and their work focuses on relief efforts and funding for artists. This work, we're really fortunate, is done in partnership with them. It's also funded by the Andrew W. Mellon Foundation.
So over the last year and a half, we've constantly thought about what we can do to support artists during one of the most difficult times we have ever faced, right? Artists needed support financially, mentally, emotionally, and everything else. So last year in March, we launched our relief fund, and to this day, we have distributed and raised $901,000 to 565 artists. So that's pretty substantial. In addition to the relief funding, we have quickly switched all of our programming to online, and it is all free, which allowed us to serve more artists and talk to more artists across the state, because again, we are a statewide organization. While doing all of that, we have also shifted most of our programs and things to talk about mental and critical need for artists. However, as we know, things don't happen in a vacuum. And so in the midst of the pandemic, there was also and still is an uprise for Black Lives Matter that reminded us that we, Artist Trust, and the community at large aren't doing enough for and in part with our Black people and artists and communities.
We originally began this partnership with Surf Plus to help artists to prepare for unexpected change and natural disasters, anything like from an earthquake to something like the fires that are happening right now on the east side of our state. That's also still a part of our work and a part of our learning through this readiness and resilience programming. Additionally, we've really been learning and discussing different ways to prepare artists for other kinds of disasters, both natural and personal. This is really the point of this conversation tonight. We want to hear from artists who embody resilience and be in conversation with y'all about ways that we can continue supporting our community of artists across Washington state.
So after the conversation amongst these wonderful artists, we will have a Q&A. All questions can be put in the chat throughout the conversation, and we will keep track of them. If you are a person of color, please put an asterisk next to your question so it can be prioritized during the conversation. And just to be very up forward, any form of harassment or disrespect would not be tolerated during the conversation, and you'll be removed from the chat.
So before we turn it over to our moderator, June, and our lovely panelists, we want to do our land acknowledgement. We acknowledge that we do statewide work and that our work is on land stolen from Native and Indigenous people. Our office is on Duwamish land. I too am currently on Duwamish land and recognize that they were the first people here and were forced to move. Understanding our place in history and understanding how we can be better to support Indigenous communities is ongoing work for our organization and for us as individuals.
And also want to do our labor acknowledgement. We acknowledge that we benefit from the prosperity of the United States, which was built on the labor of enslaved people. So please join us in expressing our deepest respect and gratitude for the descendants of those who built this country. And so at this time, I'm going to turn it over to our moderator, June T. Sanders. June T. Sanders is a trans artist, writer, educator, and curator from Southeast Washington State. She lives there still. She's an assistant professor with Digital Technology and Culture program at Washington University. And the floor is yours, June.
Great, thank you. Sorry, I thought I was going to have to introduce myself. Again, I'm June. I'm moderating. I'm happy to be here. Like Luther said, I live in Palouse. I'm originally from Kennewick, Washington, and I'm a photographer, educator, curator, and writer in that order, as the chronological it. And what we're going to do first, so everyone has some context about who we are and why we're all talking to you today, is we're going to have everyone introduce themselves and then go around a second time and give some context about their art practice in general before we give some more context about what we're going to touch on in this conversation. So from here, I will hand it over to Shantell to start the introductions.
Hello, everyone. My name is Shantell Jackson. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and I am a visual artist who currently resides in Spokane, Washington. Yeah, was that all the parts, June? Okay, cool.
Should I call on everyone? Okay, Roin?
Hey everybody, and hello. My name is Roin Morigeau, and I use they, them pronouns. Today I'm in Cowlitz territory near Portland, but I live in Spokane territories with Shantell and near June, and I am a visual artist.
Chai?
Hi everyone, my name is Chai Adera, mixed media artist, pronouns they, them / he. Did a lot of like live streaming work through protests, and right now I've been focusing on painting. Residing in Seattle.
Dujie?
Hey y'all, my name is Dujie Tahat. I use he, they pronouns. I am a writer and a poet living currently in Seattle. I grew up in Eastern Washington in the Yakima Valley.
Great. So what we can do now is just go around again, and if everyone wants to give just a short bit of info about their practice, and if you want to include sort of what you've gone through generally with your art practice this year, anything that's been a failure, success, or sort of like a major general shift before we get into the specifics of our questions related to that. Go back to Shantell.
All right. So as I said, I am a visual artist, and my work really is a lot of mixed media or multimedia. So I started my art journey with acrylic paints, and I have kind of just been all over. So that is a piece of my process, is really in my practice is getting familiar with different materials and how I can utilize them. Highlights of my work are deeply textural, colorful, and a lot of them are created in process. So when I go into creating a piece, it starts with maybe a color or a texture or something that I saw in nature. And that is kind of what informs what will happen next, and I allow it to be. And that is really important for my practice because not every piece is going to be something that will go on a market for sale. It's really about what I'm processing and what I feel through creating the piece. And for a lot of my pieces, it just so happens that folks connect with it and you know, want to own a piece or have a piece of my artwork. And I would say for my writing practice, it again, it's something from within. So it's hard to really kind of put words to those things because so much of it comes from this place within. But I would say in my writing, you can, while my work is visually abstract. My writing sometimes is abstract, but I think it gets right to the point of what I'm trying to talk about. So you will see a lot of my words come through that things that I feel very passionate about, which is the liberation and healing of Black people as I am, cultural nuances, and things that I hold dear to me. So my home, which I did not mention, which is important. I'm from Buffalo, New York originally, and I've been here in Washington for some years now. But so anyways, that is kind of just kind of briefly talking about my process and my work. And I would say over the past year or 18 months, what has worked and not worked, uniquely for me, I am a full-time professional, but right before the pandemic, I worked full-time at a different institution for over 15 years. And I took a leap and quit that job. And the next month, the pandemic happened. I think it was many lessons in figuring out where to go next with my practice. And in some ways I felt successful, and in other ways I felt like I failed in terms of really having some of those business practices kind of outlined and ready to go. That felt long-winded, but it's brief and I could talk all day, but I will pass it to Roin. I think was next in the rotation.
Yeah, thanks, Shantell. I always love hearing about your relationship to your art. So I would say as it relates to this conversation, the topic of the webinar, my entire introduction or starting my art practice was out of failure. I had a body failure. I came into creative work through being a paid laborer. I was a fabricator in New York City. I was building large structures, other people's dreams that they would draw on paper. We would build them. And then I became disabled on July 13th, 2013, and was unable to use my body to barely hold my cell phone. And I still really wanted to create. I'd never created like that before. I'd just been blue collar worker, did get a BA, first generation college student, but I'd never really tapped into that tick. And I wanted to keep making. And so I started to draw. And I was really drawing to escape my body. I was in such pain. And so I just started drawing these abstract entities kind of as what I felt like was a healthy form of dissociation. And I kept drawing, and then I started painting, and then I started showing, and now I am a career artist. I just had my first public commission through Artois at Kamiak Elementary School, a couple of pieces that I'm really proud of, that Ryan Feddersen, Colville native curator and artist, put together. I do show work here in town in Spokane. Well, I'm in Portland right now, but in Spokane. I'm starting to show more regionally. I showed out at Daybreak, a solo exhibition, Daybreak Star Indian Cultural Center over on the west side, when my buddy Hank Cooper was curating out there. Readiness and resiliency is a huge part of my practice because I'm a disabled artist and I can always plan, but I can never know what my availability will be. Also culturally, as a white native working within the contemporary landscape, grief is a huge part of our lives. And we're always grieving something. We're always celebrating something, but I think also incorporating grief into the plan, like not necessarily scheduling grief, but yeah, anyways, it's like a whole other conversation, but yeah, that's a little bit about my work. My work mostly is touching on, I was raised very matriarchally. So my work kind of touches on that, being in a very patriarchal world, yet being raised privately in a very matriarchal space. And so where those two rub is a lot of where my work ends up being about.
My next. So again, my name is Adera. Where did my art start? I mean, definitely like childhood. I was raised in a lot of different settings, and I feel like I've experienced a lot of different types of growing up, whether it was like, you know, the average public school experience, or it was, you know, going to summer camps at Daybreak Star, getting to see Andrew Morrison paint murals and stuff, and like getting that experience, like exposure to art at a young age, like middle school, elementary school, or you know, growing up in the South End, Genesee, and just like experiencing that as well, like a sense of community before the gentrification and whatnot. A lot of different stuff has led me, you know, to this Zoom call. And I mean, I remember like in high school finally getting into like film type stuff, whether it be through like classes or through like family stuff. And we're trying to get credits, you know, with Mr. Dunkerley's mural class after school, junior year, Franklin High School. But I wound up getting into VHS art, doing a lot of music videos, preferably VHS styles when I could do that. Then found myself picking up odd jobs for different like new stuff, whether it be like really twisted, like gotta do it RT type of thing, or something more local, like trying to help the People's Party, or like no youth jail here and there, like weird random stuff. And then I got into a lot of like underground clothing design through my brand, and pop-up shops at little rap shows or whatever. The pandemic kind of like hit me by surprise. I was in the middle of doing that, and it kind of wasn't really lucrative like I wish it could have been anymore. I went to a protest. It was, I think, May 27th or something. It was like a Friday night, I want to say, or something. And that shit like changed my life. And next thing I know, I was like live streaming frontline stuff like every day. And then it turned into like we're making affinity groups, and like it was more like the art of community than like the art on paper or Final Cut, you know. And now it's just this big mix of stuff. I was able to help with the BLM Street mural, the Vivid Matter Collective, which is now like a whole new page I would have never expected, honestly. Like a lot of good stuff, although, you know, there's not as much like political change or whatever. There's been a lot of good change within community and my personal life, and just people supporting people through pandemic or protest stuff, whatever other strange twists and turns have been coming. I think like, you know, it's okay to not feel resilient at times, but knowing that we have community there through, you know, all the things that we've had to go through physically, emotionally, it's been interesting, and it still gives me a lot of faith in this world. It's one big art piece, you know. Yeah, this is where we're at. Yeah. I don't know. That's it.
Cool. Yeah. So the question of practice is always an interesting one to me, because I think it like suggests like that there's a through line, or like that there's like a regular thing that happens. And I have like a hard enough time like sort of trying to come up with a through line for like my life, much less like how I do art. So it's always hard like this question. I always feel like I answer it differently whenever given the opportunity address it. But I guess like if there is something around my poeting and poetry writing, it's like certainly like I came to poetry writing through like Youth Speak Seattle, and it was always like a collaborative effort. I tend to think of poetry itself as like sort of a communal thinking and a communal imagining, and so like obviously the pandemic changed that, or at least like forced us to reconsider what like that even meant. And I think for me, like going to readings and stuff, hanging out with Luther, and like that was like how I fed myself. And I think I'd like done maybe such a good job of that prior to the pandemic that for the first sort of like 8 months, I was like 6 months, I was okay. I was like, I was in a place, I've got 3 kids, and I am lucky enough to work from home, and I sort of got to live my sort of homestead fantasy life of just like baking bread and like protesting and like eat and like doing workbook time with my children and like playing board games. Like that was like my everyday for a while, and then I'd write in between, so like most of my writing happens in between stuff anyway. And then sort of at the start of the year, I don't know, it felt like my whole life sort of collapsed. I think I just like sort of ran out of ways to trick myself into thinking that everything's going to be okay. And so like come February, like it was also, I have 3, like I said, 3 kids. They all have 3 different virtual school schedules. And after 6 months of that, and managing like four different schedules, that just like became very, very difficult. And my day job also is doing political communication. So that's across like movement stuff, as well as like within institutions. So during the legislative session in particular, things got really ramped up and very tight. And so I haven't actually written like I haven't poeted, I haven't like made poems since October. Maybe was the last like poem I tried to make. I wish that meant that I was still doing the poem working of like listening, but I think the work since then has largely been to like arrive at that place again. I write a lot. I do a lot of technical writing, just like as part of my job, highly technical writing. And even when I'm writing essays, which I'm doing for school, and just to like sort of work through some thoughts, sometimes for publication, sometimes for not. I think like that kind of writing is like, I don't know, it doesn't feel like art really. It's like sort of maybe like working out for the art making. So like I wish I had a better answer to like the art making practice question. But I think that now where I'm at is just like sort of trying to get back to a place of like not making art, but just a place of like where I can like be listening, so that when it's time, I'm ready. I think also part of that has been like also being okay with the fact that I may not. Like I just like may not get there. If I get to the point where like I'm just listening again, like I'll be really happy with that. And I think I'm starting to get there again. Like reading poems is like a really good indication of that. And I've like started to read collections again and started to have conversations again. And that's super useful. But I am also sort of at this place where like, if I'm just listening as sort of a form of art making, or, what Chai said, sort of like thinking of like collaboration as a kind of art making too, I'm good with that.
Great, thank you, everyone. I'm going to give a little bit more context about what we're talking about. I love that we kind of ended at that point for the introductions, because I think one of the threads in this conversation is expanding our idea of what constitutes a practice, right? And sort of think about our relationship to like making work, right? What that actually means. Obviously, this conversation is guided by the question, what does readiness and resilience mean to you in your art practice and community? There are hundreds of threads we can kind of chase within that, right? And I think we're all hoping this conversation will be a mix of conceptual and practical, right? So people can feel a little bit more prepared and resilient themselves after listening to this. but also maybe breaking open some concepts. You know, it implies kind of in the question that we're looking at things on the individual and communal level, talking about care and staying prepared as artists, talk about our responsibility as a community, especially when it comes to ideas of revolving the pandemic, or social justice, racial justice in particular, right? And so we're going to try to break a few of these things open. And the first question we sort of have prepared is asking people to talk a little bit about how their life and art are intersecting with the current pandemic. And I think maybe one of the sub questions people could answer within that is sort of, how is your relationship to, like, quote unquote, making work, right? Or practice or working and labor in general, maybe how that's shifted a little bit. Because I think I've already heard a few people have shifted exactly generally what they do right now as a creative person and what they feel is important or what their responsibility is, or how to maybe engage less, right? And take a break from the work that, and we can go in the same order, or if someone feels emboldened by a question, they can just jump off.
I can start. I was hoping I didn't have to, but I will. The next one, I will not start. So yeah, I think a little bit, yeah, this is such an interesting question. So for me, so how my life, art, history intersects with the current pandemic. I think that thinking back to the early days, like I had high hopes of, you know, what, when I say early days, I mean the early days of the pandemic, when we all thought in 2 weeks we would, you know, be doing other things, but here we are. So just really kind of reflecting. So I think really, so my relationship with the word resilient and readiness, it feels like this weird tension, because as a Black woman, that means something. And, you know, I had just come out of working in academia, not as a professor, but as an administrator, but also in those spaces and in that role, really using my life experience and expertise to help others around me or to contribute to the conversation. So, you know, I joke like, you know, I wasn't a professor, but kind of a teacher of life, right? Just utilizing my experience. And so I feel like that's always at the forefront. And I think, you know, thinking back to last summer and the pandemic and the, you know, revolution for Black lives and how all of that just kind of intersected with my many complex identities and not wanting to be resilient, right? Like just not wanting to give my energy in these places, because I think before the pandemic, art definitely, like I was creating, but to an extent, you know, my 9-to-5 job just wasn't cutting it anymore, right? And so art became like a hustle. And that didn't feel good because that to me didn't feel authentic, right? Like I'm hustling something, and that's not what I want my artwork to come across as. Like I want it to be a meaningful experience with whomever is viewing it or whomever is interacting with the written word or, you know, an actual piece, be it digitally or, you know, analog. So just kind of that tension, but also at the same time, like, being asked to do more, it felt like during that time. So yeah, I think to get to the heart of the question though, like my life, art and history is just kind of like that tension of what it means to like thinking about those identities and what that means, and it feeling like a hard place. And I think last summer was really the catalyst that helped me really shift that narrative and think about the joyous places of my life, my art, and like my history, right? And so I got to be a part of, so in Spokane, there was the Black Lives Matter mural that was done, and I was one of 16 artists. And through that process, really taking, you know, some of those tenuous pieces of like being the strong Black woman, being the resilient Black woman, like all those things, and really turning that narrative for myself to provide healing for myself and focusing on my joy and those things that really help me thrive, and not, you know, the things that really make it hard to get out of bed or interact with the world or want to give myself. And so I feel like it helps me to show up better. So I don't know if that answers the question, but I think those are, you know, thinking back to last summer, those are the things that kind of came up for me, really identifying like, you know, the pain is there still and those struggles exist, or, you know, how people view me, but really moving into that space of like, let's focus on my joy. Let's focus on not just my resilience, but, you know, like I'm here and I'm contributing, and I want to be not just surviving, but really thriving. I know that's like, you know, kind of cliche, but real talk, like that is what I wanted to be able to do. So I think those are kind of some of the intersections or themes that I think about when I think about the current pandemic and my art.
Does anyone want to jump off of that?
I'll hop in real quick, especially piggybacking off of what Shantell had said about art kind of turning into what felt like a hustle. Definitely feel that. Like, I mean, feeling that even before like the current pandemic, like was feeling that a lot even beforehand. It's strange because with the pandemic, it feels like there was like certain places where I had to hustle more, and then in other places I was like more free to do my own thing. If that makes sense. It was a strange mix. Yeah, there was a lot of things with the pandemic. I mean, off topic, just like nature's is awesome now. You know what I'm saying? Like the rabbits run our town, but like it's kind of like, I don't know, everything else. We see all the murals that have been getting put up in front of businesses on the plywood, and a lot of people feel empowered, whether it's through the pandemic or through BLM type stuff. And what came from that, I don't know. I got the chance to go out to 38th in Chicago, George Floyd Square, and experience that as well, and seeing how their community rose up through all the violence and drama that they had to experience, and seeing how like artists, in a sense, I mean, like obviously like Black femmes led the way, but like artists like straight up have been killing it through this stuff, and it's a good reminder that our art is more than just, you know, the hustle, and you know, we are like the revolution, and we are like really like out here. I don't know, like if it's not a police killing or fire, then things that I used to think of really eye catching was the art. You know, it's good to see that people still care about that. We are still valued of each other, like, you know, those constant reminders. I don't know. Yeah, although I'm definitely ready for COVID to one day be over. Like, there's some ways that it's helped build me, and like that I've never had to, you know what I'm saying? We've all had our trials and tribulations. It's been an interesting one, that's for sure. I think the biggest help for me was just finding more community, getting out of my, quiet little area and meeting more people. That's been a big help. Might come back to me. Y'all keep talking.
I mean, I think maybe sort of jumping off of both of your points, and June, I'm really interested in the question about labor. I think like we could probably all relate to the struggle. I mean, everybody on this call could probably relate to the tension between like the labor of art making and then the labor of like having the art in the world, right? Like the hustle, as it were. I think like speaking for myself, like you spend a long time thinking about a poem, and it's like a 12-word poem, like how do you like measure or account for that kind of labor? Like I don't know. It's not even a useful question. I don't know. I mean, it is insofar as I have to pay rent, but like simultaneously I don't rely on art to the labor of my art to like pay my rent, so which is a whole other thing. And then the sort of labor of the hustle, like there's a little bit more of a correlation between like, maybe if you put more hustle into it, you actually like might get a little bit more reward, but even that is sort of structurally defined, right, by like social identity and positionality. So I'm also like interested in the question, I think, of like visibility that comes along with that too, like because I think there's a certain like there's a hustle around visibility that really matters in terms of like getting your art into the world, and that like feels super problematic in 1,000 ways. But like it's also a question that's like related to audience, which is like a really important and I think valid question that relates to the art again. So I don't know that I have like really any great answers. I think like just some questions around like what labor really means in terms of art making. I like the idea of like expanding our definitions. I am a poet, but like I think like one of the ways that I'm thinking about labor, at least that I've been allowed to think about labor within the context of the pandemic, is like I mentioned earlier, like I have 3 kids. I get to spend a lot more time with them, in a way that I wasn't allowed to before. And they're 12, 7, and 6, which means they were like 10, 6, and 5 when all of this started. And thinking through like what it means to, I guess like even just like reframing like what is the most radical thing I can do is raise rad kids in some way, just for me in this moment. That doesn't mean that like that's labor too, right? That's labor that like again I'm not like asking to be compensated for, but it is also labor that like influences to the way I think about art. It's also like I think what frees me from what I said earlier, which is like I don't know that I need to make art to feel validated, because I have sort of done this labor that I can sort of look at and be like, I've made something here, right? I've invested in sort of making, shaping rad kids, and that feels like a way to sort of release the impulse towards like I have to make stuff to be valid. Yeah, I don't know.
I'll piggyback on that. My partner and I raised a 6-year-old, and like one of the immediate things I think for all of us is that we just went home. We came home. Like COVID hit, and we all came home if we were able to. For us, Augie started working from the house, and I started spending less time at the studio and started spending more time at home with our family and the kid. And COVID was really so deeply triggering because it immediately brought back all this ancestral stuff. Like we've been here before culturally, like for my people, like wading through like what a large scale sickness looked like, and what it would take to feel safe in that was actually not getting to go to powwow, not getting to get together. And what felt like the safest for me was to actually start beading and communing like online. I made digital like community with indigiqueers, with beaters from all over Turtle Island, regardless of, you know, where the colonial borders are. And I stopped painting and I started beading almost exclusively, like all year. And I've never asked myself like why that happened until like thinking about it after this question that June just posed, like, why did I do that? Like I needed to make myself feel safe. And that's what we call it, beading is medicine. Like, and it is like it has fed me. And then that's also like been able to, in terms of like a radical shift, right? Like the hustle. I've been able to sell beadwork, which I was not expecting to do. But just kind of like following, like we make work, we are all artists, we, whatever our mediums are, because we make that to survive. We make that to digest and process the world. And it stopped being paintbrushes and it started being, you know, beads. And so it was like just a medium shift really. And I'm going to bring that beadwork into my fine art practice finally, very soon. But yeah, I think also just, I'd already gone through like a personal epidemic becoming disabled, like very mid like career. And so I had done this before. I had remembered, there was a remembering of like, oh, you think you're doing something and you can't do it anymore? Okay, yeah. And so it was a little bit of leaning on the scaffolding of that and knowing what to do because I had done it before, and then just becoming a support for everyone else that was just flailing. I feel I have a lot of the basic housing, food down. And so then I just became the tree, you know, and just fielding those first calls for people who are just struggling in my community. So being the more stable person is a job. And that became, you know, part of my practice, part of what fed me.
Thank you, everyone. It's great how much this is just streamlined into the next question. I think kind of to spin through this, the next question we have is asking, how do we as artists help each other navigate art institutions and also move past them as needed? And I think the sub question in that, right, is like, why are we as artists important? What's important to us? What might be broken in the capital A art world or in art institutions, you know, and any shifting that we might be imagining through this last year and a half, right, of sort of how artists function in our society, are all great kind of prompts you can jump off of. And also, obviously, how has the pandemic sort of played a role in finding new ways to support each other? You know, artist to artist or artists in your local community, right, or any other iteration. And so we can, you know, maybe we can reverse it. If Rowan, you kind of want to jump off that one first.
I'll pass for now and then maybe circle back.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm
got it.
Go ahead.
Yeah. Shoot. How has COVID-19 played a role in finding new ways and supporting each other? Well, I noticed like there was lots of calls for artists to do different projects. I mean, they were able to socially distance, or we were able to socially distance. I, amongst others, were like sewing masks and whatnot, and there was different ways to just like, I don't know, that artists became like the important workers or whatever. Almost like, I wouldn't say like grocery type folks. I don't know where I'm going with this, but I definitely did feel a lot of value, or at least looking for a way. And then as I got more into like mutual aid and stuff, there was ways to ask for requests and stuff. There was people helping me, or I was able to help others. I don't know whether it's through materials or pointing them in the right direction through, I mean, there was a lot more people on Instagram boosting each other through social media. And I don't know, maybe that's been a thing. I think that obviously has, but I found more resources and there was more people like me that also did. I don't know. I think I need to keep thinking about like a better way to answer the question though. If you want to keep going.
So I think about art institutions all of the time. And I think that at least like in the world of poetry, in the context of like the pandemic, I think there has been a sort of recognition that like, I guess one answer to that question is that we don't need institutions. I think like there's this way from the Poetry Foundation to the Hugo House, there's this way in which like when the institution stopped becoming a place for people to gather, it became clear that like there was like collective power in the way that institutions like, you know, arts institutions are designed in such a way that they prioritize the work and then maybe the person and hardly ever the community that produces them. And so once the institution sort of lost a bit of leverage during, I think, the pandemic, and also in the middle of the uprisings and the reckonings that were happening last summer, I think I found myself in many conversations where poets were empowered to assert that the institution is like not actually all that helpful and in a lot of ways actually very harmful. And I think I come to that thinking by way of thinking like institutions just sort of are opposed to community. You know, just sort of functionally they're hierarchical. They are interested in preserving their own power, whereas like community is like horizontal and it's like doesn't really have a purpose. It just is. And so I think like there's this really interesting way of, again, at least in poetry, to say that like we actually don't need institutions, and insofar as the institution has something to offer, it is like done with others, right? It is like if there is something, if the institution has something to offer, then it is for like, how do we think of an institution for and by community, which I think historically has been a bit of a paradox. Like that's the question I think I'm interested in, and I think the question that is like being asked, and you know, not for nothing, I think Artist Trust is like doing a pretty great job at starting to ask some of those questions.
Yeah, I think this is an interesting question, and I am, as much as I am a part of institutions, like in many ways, like I work for an institution, literally. I mean, it's not an art institution, but when I think about just institutions, it comes with so much baggage and complexity, because a part of, so like, how do I help other artists navigate that? I don't know, as I try to navigate it myself, right? I think those opportunities to really boost one another via, you know, all the virtual digital platforms. And what I found, quite honestly, is that for me, like how I felt and how I looked at it is that and it gave me an opportunity to reflect and even think about how I do help to boost other artists or encourage their practice or navigate institutions. And one thing that was it felt clear to me, my perception was that my artwork was only really boosted as it related to Blackness. right? Like that. And so like that was really hard to navigate, because that's important for me, because it has, there's so much story, there's so much history, there's narrative, there's nuance, like there's just so much to that. And so, yeah, like I just, that's just a question that I think I thought about and reflected on. And I think the ways in which I think about it now and how I would like to help artists navigate is, I mean, I think it can be done within community. I think that's really important, and really to break away from the institution. As much as I'm a part of them, I don't enjoy them because, you know, like what has been said, like they are hierarchical, they are not necessarily weren't historically made with me in mind. And it doesn't even matter if I have an art degree or, you know, writing degree, or, you know, whatever kind of degree it is. I feel like in some instances, it's about who you know, it's about connections. But I would like to imagine what could we do differently to, especially for young artists. And so thinking about how are we, you know, young people who want to be artists, who want to live out their passion as other people do, how do we as artists encourage that? And I think the hard part is when I think about what success means, I've had to kind of deconstruct that, because when I think about success, I think about, you know, money, I think about followers, I think about, you know, especially in a digital world, it's like, okay, how many followers do I got? Can I get monetized? You know, all those things, right? And so I would like to imagine a different world in art communities that probably exist, but I haven't had that experience necessarily in Spokane, in which we are reimagining how we support one another, how we encourage young people to be artists, and how do we pour into them to, you know, when they, you know, become of age to, you know, start pursuing, how do we do that, and how do we do it in a way that helps them to be sustainable, not billionaires, not maybe recognized, because I feel like a lot of creatives are usually like shy and don't even, you know, they're like, yeah, I'm an artist, but, you know, I don't got to talk about it. Like, just look at it, you know? So like, how do we encourage some of those things? And I think that can be done formally or informally. I don't think if you know people who know young people, you know, there are ways to, I think, pour into not only one another, but the generation to come. And I think that's super important. And I think for me, and especially the communities that I'm a part of that have been historically impacted by systemic oppression, I feel like it is important to, you know, if there are like-minded people, to come together and really think about ways that we can encourage that and pour into not only ourselves, but younger people.
Hopping in like off of that too is like I think in the recent years there's been a lot more people, especially in Seattle in particular. I think that, I mean, everyone is like at a different point in their lives of learning or unlearning, but like in Seattle there's been like a lot of more BIPOC voices, queer voices being boosted as of recently. And I think that whether you're, you know, at least in a better place within the system or institution, or it's just helping you find a group of people or find a voice to help you get out of that institution. Either way, it's there's a lot of right steps that a lot of people have been making. I've noticed, although you know, everything is a double-edged sword, and there's a lot of things we still need to fight, and we're a long way from accomplishing. Us being able to find our groups and people that will boost our voices is really important, and some people taking a step back as well and helping boost those voices is definitely dismantling to the institution or whatever, the gods or fucking kings and masters or whatever people be talking about. I don't know. Yeah. know.
Well, we only have a few minutes left, so we can try to address at least one of the questions in the Q&A. I've never done this before. Oh. Shoot. Oh, there it is. Okay. We had a question from someone in the audience that asked, what are some ways you personally transform anger about very large issues into an expression that might create empathy / connection rather than more anger? How do you distance yourself enough from it while still tapping into that energy?
That is an interesting question. So, you know, I think about lived experience and, you know, thinking about like the stories of my family, my ancestors, and I think anger is appropriate. I don't always associate it with something negative, and I think that anger and empathy can exist together. And I don't actually personally don't try to distance myself from anger per se, because again, it's a part of the gamut of emotions, and I think it does have use. And so, and I think, you know, my anger, whatever strong emotion I'm feeling, I think it comes out in my practice, it comes out in my work. And so I think for me, really going back to, you know, my first, you know, that first question, like healing has been key for me. And it doesn't mean that anger isn't there, right? Like, I think I have a right to be angry. I think, you know, when we think about just, it's a lot, like, and I can talk about that for a long time, so I won't belabor it, but I think it's useful. And I think that anger and empathy can go together, and I can still create beautiful things and beautiful community with folks who are, you know, like-minded. And I think for me, I've more so distanced myself from spaces in which my anger is not tolerated or allowed or policed or not accepted or understood. And I want to be in spaces that we can share. We have maybe common experiences. We can talk about it. We can rage. We can feel what we feel, and then we can go do the work. And I think that's important. And, you know, that fuels me. Like, I have poems that are angry, and I want people to feel that. I want people to feel that emotion. I want people to be transformed through that, right? Like through those words, those works. And, you know, maybe that could be a catalyst of change. And I think, you know, yeah, so anyways, I can go on, but that's just kind of the short and dirty of it.
Yeah, I'm really interested in this question, and I think I'm really interested in your answer too, Shantell. I feel like you and I could probably have a really long conversation about this, because I really want to ask more follow-up questions about your answer. But I do think that there's something about I guess, like, I have skepticism about anger and empathy in art, mostly because to me those feel, especially the way that question I think is presented, is those feel like political questions, which are not distinct and separate from art, but not inherent to art making, I don't think. I think that when we feel anger about big things, it can be clarifying and motivating. The question becomes, like, to what end are we utilizing this anger? Like, what's the motivation? Who am I trying to motivate to do what with this anger? And often the answer is, like, it doesn't actually need to be a poem. You know, the answer is, I need to go organize my people to go do a thing, to show out. And I think, to Shantell's point, is like, we need to rage and then, like, go do a thing that exists outside the bounds of, like, the piece of art that we're making. So I have, like, I think the question, I think for me that it always begins with like an interrogation of that. Like I feel anger about these really large systems, and like to what end am I putting that into my art? Because I think, as I don't have skepticism about anger. I think anger is super important. I have a ton of skepticism about empathy, about whether or not empathy exists. I think there's a lot of social science that suggests that like it doesn't across race and gender and class. And so again, like who are we aiming our anger, our desire for anger and clarity and empathy at? And is art the best vehicle to get them to go do that? Right? Because if what we're saying is, if what the subtext here, to make some of the subtext the text, if what we're saying is that like we need sort of middle to upper class white folks to feel a type of anger, to see systems clearly and vote differently, or like to go protest stuff, like I don't think that's going to work. I don't think the poem's going to do that. I don't think the best poem on like ever written could do that. Certainly at the scale we need to like make the change that we like, I think our art often reaches for, or to get to the point that our art is imagining. So yeah, again, like it's also related to the labor question too, right? Like, because like that is a kind of art making. There's a kind of like art labor beyond the confines of the art object that we're making. Yeah, I have lots of thoughts about this one.
That makes me like just like what that brought up for me is like that our anger is so sacred and it's so personal, and like I don't want to waste a drop on like an empty ear, right? So like I don't want to necessarily be angry in my work. I will often wait. I will like do ceremony for anger with my people, right? And then like I'll wait until that anger turns to sadness or like to grief, and then it can become vulnerable and anecdotal, and I'm embedding a lot of information like facts into my work, because I don't want to waste my anger on someone who's not asking for it, because that is ceremony, right? So I'm keeping that personally for me. That's just how I do it. Anger is necessary. It will happen. It's always happening. It's healing and it's medicine. And in a way, I think it was actually Patrice Cullors. I was on like a webinar with her once about her master's program, and she talked about how all art is political, like whether we want it to be or not, right? Like the absence of or inclusion of it. And what do I want people to see with my work? I don't necessarily think I have a mission. I'm just like going through my process. It's kind of my diary, and if people resonate it with it, cool. But I often find that the work that conveys the message that I'm thinking about and then people are getting is when I'm staying really vulnerable in that message, and that is at the edge, right, of our comfort zone. That's not a happy place. That's a comfortably uncomfortable place, and that can include anger, but that's usually probably like for me like more private.
We have another question. I'm going to try to paraphrase it, asking about anyone's experience with teaming up or connecting with older artists, and what that has been like, if so, and any lessons from that. The question particularly asks about, navigating resilience that you might have learned from older folks with that.
So yes, the struggle is not new, and every generation certainly has challenges, and speaking from my experience, like Black liberation is, you know, yet to be had in some level, on some levels. And so I love the idea of partnering or collaborating or even talking. Like, I value elders. I think intergenerational work is so important and valuable. And I just think about my family and my family history and listening to the stories of my grandmother, my aunts, my uncles. You know, my grandma was 98 when she passed, and she lived through some stuff. And so, like, you know, depending on the perspective and the generation, like this last year is not anything new, right? Like, it's not unique. I mean, it may be unique in the sense of like, well, I guess it is unique for me because I've not lived through a global pandemic in the way that COVID-19 has been. And so I'm gonna pick on my mom and my aunts a little bit. And I think for that work to happen, I was a part of a Zoom with like my family. And one thing, you know, they wanted to bring the young people in, but the thing was, like, some of them, I'm not calling nobody out because I don't want to get in trouble. So like, I love y'all, but like, we got to listen to each other. I think that is, I would love to be in a space where we can listen to each other, where, you know, I'm not rolling my eyes at your experience and you're not rolling your eyes at my experience. And there's space for us to talk. Like, you know, sometimes I'll talk to my mom and I'm like, but can I say, you know, without her like just all over me about her experiences. So I think that is great. And I think like I don't have the lifetime of experience that my mother had, you know, going through the desegregation of schools, right? Like, I didn't live through that, you know, so like in her eyes, maybe my experiences is a walk in the park. I don't think that's what she believes, but I do think, you know, there are some things there. So yeah, like leaning into the wisdom of elders and older artists. And there is an artist here that I talked to that for a while after we did the mural. He was very instrumental and influential in my practice and got me to think about things that I hadn't thought about as an artist, and really helped me to think about my values and what am I doing it for, and going through that. And that time with that artist was invaluable, because I couldn't maybe have gotten that with people all from my generation, where we're about to do a worksheet and talk about values, you know, about our artwork and our practice and things like that. So I don't know if that answers the question, but I'm here for it. And I think it's important. And when there are those opportunities, I cling to it. You know, I got a chance to kind of shadow and be a part of a photography project with this artist. And just, again, hear the stories and the wisdom and lean into that, and share some of my stories and my wisdom and lean into that. So I think it's important and needed.
I feel like everything I know and am is like, in a sense, thanks to my elders, you know. And whether I know it or not, whether it's a direct teaching or it's just me learning off of YouTube or something, and it's, you know, taking that time to just learn for myself. If they didn't teach me, it is still all brought to you by the generations before, and the teachings of, you know, the land that we're on. And I don't know, growing up, that was like one of the biggest things too, like listening to grandma, like, you know, I think that a lot of us, when it comes to art, when it comes to, you know, we might feel like inspired by, you know, this artist or that person, but a lot of it does have to come from like learning, and like young people do still pave the way, but it's all, you know, the road has been set for us. Not, I remember Bruce Miller, old school, had done this a lot of like teachings of cedar, what's called weaving, basket weaving and stuff, and And it was all about, you know, if the kids wanted to listen, like they didn't have to listen. And like, I don't know, main thing was like, everyone's going to learn different ways. And, you know, sometimes we're going to get that blessing of coming in contact with people teaching us. And sometimes we might just have to learn the hard way too. And it's all part of the plan, you know. It's going to come naturally, especially when we're talking about art. Like, can never force art, but always appreciative and always looking out for new teachings, you know. Yeah.
I think one small thing that I think that sort of example of like how to like sort of giving kids the option to learn is like a really makes me think of like one thing that we haven't talked about that underlies maybe all of the questions here, but like power. You know, like there's something I think inherent in sort of a question of intergenerational learning too, is like there's a question of power, which also like, you know, sometimes it's really difficult to learn across generations because there are certain perceived powers that fall along like different axes. And there are ways I think to learn that are sort of absent power that don't, you know, I don't need to show in order to have learned it, right? There doesn't need to be a ton of visibility. So I think like the, you know, the certainly like how do we make space and sort of give each other the option to learn? And like I think that there's something there about power, right? I think certainly like being less beholden to you know, again, speaking from a poetry perspective, I think is probably true across all art, is like there certainly is a drive towards like the newest, most emerging voice. You know, there's a certain like sort of market power in that, but it is not like necessarily material power. And so I guess like thinking through like all the different axes, I think that like the intergenerational question and like how we learn, how knowledge gets transferred, how information gets transferred in the process of that knowledge, I think is like, that's the question, right? Like I'm less, for me, I am less concerned with like, what is the product than I can make from that? And how do we sort of position ourselves like to demonstrate that as much as like, what is the process? You know, certainly having kids is like, for me, like a really revealing. And like, again, that's why I think that example, I'm like, yeah, like that's, you know, there's like no ego there. There's no power tripping. It's just like, here's like information that I have. And if you are ready to participate in the like knowledge sharing of it, which is like a active process, then like, we're going to do that together.
Too, especially in like POC communities, impoverished communities and stuff, like people definitely I can't speak for the next person, but there's a lot of people that don't get the privilege of getting to learn from their elders in a lot of scenarios. You know what I'm saying? I grew up without a strong male role model and had to find that through other stuff, you know, but it's definitely, it helps make a person, if they can fight through that, you know, someone like bro who's able to like be there with their kids finally, you know, who knows, like, I don't know what that could have looked like years ago. Like through art and stuff, we're able to hopefully break free from certain chains or, you know, things holding us back. And sometimes you have to learn from your elders. There's no choice. You know what I'm saying? I don't know. Yeah.
Okay. We're at 6:15, so I think we might have to call it there, but I really appreciate everything you all had to say. And there was a lot of questions posed at the questions, and a lot of dissecting and interrogating, which I always really appreciate, and that gives me something to think about as I'm laying in bed tonight, trying to weave all these things together. So thank you all for that. I can hand off to Lydia and Luther for the very end.
Yeah, just thank you all so much for that really wonderful, insightful conversation. You know, it's crazy, like hearing conversations, but you're not allowed to like really like jump in. It's always interesting to me. I'm like, I have something to say about this, but I can't say anything right now. So I'll just take my little notes, put it to the side. But yeah, thank you all, June, for moderating. Thank you, Rowan, Shantell, Dujie, and Chai for being here, being wonderful, being brilliant. I really do appreciate your voice and your insight and talking about your experiences here. It really does help Artist Trust become a better organization for artists that we're serving and just individually as well as people working in Artist Trust.
Yeah, I'll just echo Luther's thanks, and June, thank you for all of the preparation that you put into tonight. Shantell, Rowan, Chai, Dujie, your vulnerability and honesty was like really inspiring, and I can't wait to reflect on this conversation. Thank you. For all of our attendees who are here in the audience, thank you so much for joining us. Your presence made the conversation that much more rich. Next week, all of you will be receiving an email with a feedback form. If you want to give us some feedback or some insights that you have from the conversation, we'd love to receive them and read them. We will also be posting a recording of this conversation on our website.
I guess last but not least, again, thank you all for being here. Couldn't be here without you all. This is again a part of a program series that is in partnership with Surf Plus on readiness and resilience. So stay tuned for more of these programs. And also, Community Conversation is a program that we're doing constantly, consistently, talking about different subjects at hand. So feel free to look out for those as well. And again, thank you all so much. Have a wonderful and hopefully restful night.